Okay, we're going to transition now into our discussion phase. I'm going to ask Dr. Choco to have a seat and keep your microphone. And so questions for either speaker or questions more generally perhaps about cluster randomized trials? Sir.
Sure. So maybe just link to the second presentation. So two issues. One is how did you deal with the possibility of the woman having more than one partner? And in which case, was it the choice of the woman to decide which partner she wanted to bring to the clinic? The second issue being the incentive. Was this incentive targeted specifically at the male partner, or did the woman also get a share out of it? Or could you have had a design where the woman also got an incentive to get the male partner to the clinic, and presumably the male partner also got a share or got a separate incentive? The whole issue of incentive, I think, becomes important from a health systems research perspective. There's a lot of conditional cash transfers now happening in low and middle income country context, and I think from an ethics perspective, we need to discuss this whole idea of an incentive as reimbursement versus an incentive as a core intervention of the research design. So I think those are two separate issues from an ethics perspective as well.
Did you want to respond to that?
Yes. So the two kits were provided. The assumption was 1-to-1. So one woman, one man. I think probably that's the shortest answer I can give. We gave two kits because men, say they say that the results of my partner are mine. Then when the woman says I'm negative, they say, well, that's not true. So we gave two kits in case there was need to, have couple testing. The incentives were meant again for only the man. So we wrote a letter which was personalized, with his name, and he has to show up with that letter for us to give him the incentive. So it was only to the man. Again, there's a whole lot of, issues that came up through our qualitative study in terms of, who should get the incentives. With women saying, well, I am the one who was, in the first place, introduced the issue, so I should have a share of the incentives. Because if you give him the cash, I'm sure he will disappear for a week and come back very drunk. So, yeah, but it was just targeted for the man.
Okay, we have a question in the back.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Paul Ndebele from Zimbabwe. I've got 3 questions. The first one concerning the clustering itself. So, as you clustered using the days of the week, it's actually possible that as the women are coming to the clinics, they get to know that on this particular day, people are going to be offered the $10. On this particular day, people are going to be offered the $3. And I think that actually has implications in terms of the numbers that you'd end up with in the various clusters. The second issue also has to do with the informed consent, that as you are addressing the women about this particular study, they find out more about the study itself, and this can actually go down to a community level where people now get to know that if you go on this particular day, this is the intervention that is going to be offered. And that in itself actually is some element of some selective bias that creeps into the trial itself. The third point is about the point that you raised about policymakers not being interested in interventions that are to do with payment. I'm looking here at something like $10, and then you are thinking of application of this intervention at the end of the trial. And for such, then you'd need a letter of commitment from the Ministry of Health to say, if this is found to be useful, we as the ministry are going to support this. So I wanted to get your views with regards to the position of the ministry when it was the time for you to now apply to the ethics committee to say, yes, the Ministry of Health is actually in favor of this study because they are committed to implementing these interventions post-trial. Thank you.
Yes, over here.
All right.
Sorry. Did you want to respond?
Thank you very much for those three interesting reflections. It was not possible for anyone, including ourselves, to guess, what was going to be the arm until that particular day. The morning of that day is when we got a call from our independent statistician who randomized which arm is recruiting. So it was really difficult for anyone to actually guess. And we targeted first antenatal visits. So it wasn't women who were coming back anytime soon anyway. So maybe we were advantaged here. But if we are thinking of other type of trials or with different groups of participants, that point may need to be taken into account. But you can make it in such a way that people cannot guess the arm that is recruiting. The consent process was two-stage, as I said. So the first part, which was a group consent, it was just group education with information very general about the study. It did not even go into details as to what type of intervention is being given on that day. Until the one-to-one session, that's when they were getting the information about which arm is recruiting. Having said that, I didn't show the data about participation. Participation rates were very similar across all the arms. So even in terms of women who discontinued after learning their trial arm, that was not different between the arms. Because we were also particularly concerned that maybe they know that it's a standard of care, so therefore they would drop out. But we didn't see that in this particular trial. The issue about policymakers, well, I mean, it's a difficult one because I'm not a policymaker myself. As a researcher, sometimes you get a gap in the literature, and you look at questions that need to be answered. So you go in trying to address those questions. But again, having said that, the intervention of just providing self-test kits is now being considered not only in Malawi but in several other countries for large-scale implementation.
Okay, we have another question here.
I have two questions. My first question is, how would you differentiate public health practice from public health research? Because I think the Ministry of Health was involved in both projects. So how would they differentiate the two? And of course, we say that if it's public health practice, then it may even be exempt from ethics review. So that's my first question. My second question is about privacy and confidentiality, particularly with the HIV study. It's not only an issue of informed consent, but there's also the issue of privacy. So how was this addressed by the team, considering that the project is being done in the community?
All right. Thank you,
Hang on.
Professor
Did you
Zal.
wanna
I'm
respond to that?
Augustine.
Just a second.
Okay. Can I go?
No, just wait 1 second.
All right.
Okay. So thanks for your comment. About the differentiation between public health practice and research. The Poly-Iran study was public health research, and it was approved. The proposal was approved by a committee, and then the ethical issues was discussed and approved by the ethical committee. But we should respect to public health practice and should consider that we were not aimed to disturb public health practice. So we just ask public health policymakers to help us to implement a study into health networks. And we had specialized, trained interviewers and research fellows for conducting the study, but we have joined the collaborations from public health networks. They called BFBRs. They help us to find some site for recruitment and collecting data within the village, and then help us to find people and to follow them. That's it.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
All right, thank you very much. All protocols observed. I'm Augustine Nyagala from Nigeria. To my friend Reza, two issues. What's your redefinition for minimum of care? Why not standard of care? Because that could have been a good style. You could have used that group as a reference point rather than use minimum of care. So get to define what minimum of care is. It could be relative or subjective. So let's use objective definitions. Again, availability of products before the trial. How come ethical committee approves a study that they know that maybe thereafter patients may not be able to assess that aspect? So you need to clarify that. To the second speaker on HIV, I don't know why the ethics committee approved a study that had incentives which could could bias the outcome of the study. That's one. Secondly, selection of subjects. Some had already had HIV, whereas some were newly diagnosed. Shouldn't you have standardized the groups maybe previously diagnosed or newly diagnosed so they could control a lot of bias within the group code? Thank you.
Golden Reza, would you like to address the first question?
For the first question about minimal care, it was defined as we have planned to have follow-up visits each 6 months, and in each follow-up visits, we have done blood pressure testing, blood pressure measurement, and then to deliver some sort of education and training about decreasing the risk factors and to modifying lifestyle by providing brochure and pamphlet and some educational materials to participants. And this is not done in usual care in our population. So the minimal care is blood pressure measurement and providing lifestyle change for reducing cardiovascular risk factors every 6 months. And this care is provided to both intervention and control arm. And I'm sorry, I didn't understand your second question.
I think they were directed at Augustine.
Thank you very much for those two questions. I think the first one is a complex one, where you're saying, how did the ethics committees approve a study with incentives? And I think maybe that's why this meeting is there, is probably to discuss that issue, because I may not have an answer for that. But what I would say is we didn't incentivize HIV testing, because I think we need to be very careful. So incentivizing HIV testing would be a little bit difficult, because that is supposed to be a voluntary thing. So if you incentivize something that is voluntary, probably that can raise more ethical challenges than incentivizing linkage step, which we did. So the linkage step requires that somebody takes an action. So they have to go to the clinic. Going to the clinic for either confirmation of the HIV test result or to access, ART or circumcision, like in our case, means that people actually have to spend money out of pocket costs to get to the clinic. So if you incentivize that, there is at least a justification, for saying that you are meeting costs that these people would actually, make in order to go to the clinic. And in these settings, you may agree with me, people spend 3, 4 hours, 5 hours, like they were saying in our qualitative study, just to get these steps done. So they have lost valuable time, And particularly because these are men, they are breadwinners. If they spend that much time in the clinic, it means that they cannot find money for that day. So that is a problem. So I just wanted to highlight those two issues, that you are not incentivizing testing, but it's the linkage. The second bit, which is recruiting women who were already positive. Maybe I didn't say that very well because of time. So women were eligible even if they were positive, because unless if they said their partner is already also positive and on treatment. Because remember, people get into these relationships without testing, so they don't really know. So if the woman is positive, but she doesn't know the status of her partner, we cannot really you say that she's not eligible, because we are interested in the partner and not the woman. And I think it's a good thing to actually recruit her, because that may facilitate the process of the partner learning his result as well. So we didn't remove women because they were positive, but we did remove men who were reported by their partners to be positive and on treatment.
Okay, Mike?
Thank you. Sorry. Thanks. I really enjoyed both presentations. Given that this is a session about study design, I guess the question I was interested in primarily is whether the men really are in the study or whether they're not in the study. So it was interesting that you got a consent waiver from the men. My immediate response to this study is that the women are in the study and the men are the endpoint of the study, as it were, in some way, which I think quite interesting. Because then if you think of it that way, there are important ethical questions here, I think, about, so for example, you talked about, you suggested or hinted that there were pressures on some of these men to have tests that they didn't necessarily want. And the quote from the woman on the slide was, well, they don't have an excuse to not do it if we give them the bus fare. So if there's a strongly gendered element to this as well. So if this was the other way around, if this was about men getting women to have tests, we'd raise questions about coercion in this situation. And I think that's quite interesting if you think about it coming back to the study design. Are the men in or out of this study? And what are the implications there for the ethics of thinking about them as participants?
Thank you very much. I don't think there's anything more for me to add there, because I think it was more of a comment than a question.
Do you really think the men are participants here, or are they the outcome, in a sense, of the study?
I think they are the outcome. I think they are the outcome, because I think the participants are women, because we enrolled them at the baseline, and also we have a follow-up interview 4 weeks later. But the outcome is measured from the men. So I think that's a good clarification. And if we thought about it that way, probably we could have avoided most of the other questions.
Okay, last question will go to.
Yeah, I think in terms of the post-trial access that everybody talks about, and which comes out in ethical statements about post-trial access, if you do cost effectiveness or costing, so cost effectiveness should be a critical component of any trial that we do, because then you can then go to your ministry and demonstrate the cost effectiveness of your intervention for polypills. And so people, in terms of post-trial access, the most important thing is that the governments take up the intervention and roll it out. And so having good costing data and showing the cost effectiveness is critical. Even for the trial in Malawi, because cash transfers are a well demonstrated intervention to improve health outcomes. In Mexico, cash transfers are used to improve immunization, school-going, school attendance, as well as food. So I don't think there's anything wrong with using cash transfers or cash incentives to improve health outcomes. And so for your policy makers, if you had demonstrated the fact that $3 or $10 could avert or impact on outcomes, it may be a financial justification to introduce that intervention. or to use other funders like the World Bank and that to roll out these interventions. So maybe we're not thinking about post-trial access in a way that will cause policymakers to take it up, and it should be a critical component of any trial we do if we want it to be taken up at a community level.
Ghulam Reza?
Okay, thanks. Very good comment. And for the cost effectiveness analysis, we are planning to do such analysis and to provide the results to government and hopefully to make their supports for extrapolation the polyfill to general population if the results is encouraging, if the outcome or the effectiveness is okay and is confirmed. Yeah, that's the plan we are going to do. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all for your questions. And please join me in thanking Dr. Rochdale and Dr. Choko.